close your eyes, and let your mind travel with me. We are going far away from the world of today. We are stepping out of this noise and into the silence of the past. The wheel of time is turning backward. Years, decades, centuries are slipping away. And we stop in the year 1832. Just feel the immense vastness of the Atlantic Ocean. It is the late hour of the night. All around there is only deep, dark water talking to the sky. There is a strange chill in the air, that smell of salt water that has been the companion of sailors for centuries. On the chest of this vast and wide ocean, an old wooden merchant ship is cutting through the waves, moving forward with full speed. The sails of the ship are filled with wind, and the sound of their flapping echoes in this silence. Creak, creak. The wooden planks are groaning, as if they are pressed under a very heavy burden. On the deck of this ship, where the rest of the passengers are sleeping in their cabins, a shadow is awake. Wrapped in fog, a young man stands near the railing. He is wearing a long velvet coat that testifies to his wealth. The sea breeze is scattering his hair. His name is William Huntington Russell. Apparently, he should be the luckiest man in the world. He is the heir to an American family that possesses lands, wealth, and a name. But, if you go closer and look into his eyes, you will find no happiness there. There is a void, a deep, dark desolation, and beneath this desolation, a spark of anger is smoldering that refuses to be extinguished. In his mind, it is not the sound of the ocean, but some voices from the past that are echoing. He is remembering, again and again, that one moment which turned the course of his life. To understand his pain, we must go back to those ancient halls of Yale University. It was a matter of a few months ago. William was the smartest student in the class. He was the valedictorian of his class. He was certain that when the members of the university's largest and most prestigious society, Phi Beta Kappa, were announced, his name would be at the top. He was waiting for that moment when someone would come, place a hand on his shoulder, and say, "You are one of us." But that moment never came. When the list was posted, William's name was not on it. He was ignored. He was rejected. This was not just the denial of a membership, it was a forceful slap on his entire being, his pride, and his family name. He felt as if he was standing outside a glass wall, and the people inside were laughing at him. He could not bear this humiliation. His heart broke, and carrying this broken heart and wounded ego, he fled America. He went to Germany in search of peace. But he did not find peace in Germany. He found something else there. There, he learned new philosophy. He spent time in secret societies there that were not soft like the debating clubs of America. They were hard. They were dark. There he saw how a few people, sitting in dark rooms, dream of controlling the entire world. He learned that if you do not get respect, then create fear. If people do not love you, then force them to bow before you. And now, on this cold night of 1832, he is returning. The ship is approaching America. Far away on the horizon, a faint light is visible. This is his land. He grips the railing so hard that his knuckles turn white. He is making a promise to himself, a whisper that gets lost in the wind. You gave me no place in your world, no matter what. Now I will build a world where the laws are written not by you, but by me. You have spurned me, but a day will come when your sons and grandsons will beg to enter this fortress built by me. In his suitcase, there are no gifts or souvenirs from Germany. In his bag are some old, yellowed papers with strange symbols drawn on them, and in his mind is a terrifying idea. A plan that will forever change the laughing, playing, innocent campus of Yale University. The ship is docking at the harbor. The sounds of ropes being pulled are now clear. The wooden plank is dropped down. Thud. Footsteps echo. But the people standing on the shore and the students sleeping in the university do not know that the young man who is now setting foot on American soil is not alone. With him is a shadow, a silent conspiracy that will rule the halls of the world for the coming 2 centuries. This is the arrival of Skull and Bones. William Russell had returned to Yale University. The campus was the same. The buildings were the same. The trees were the same. But William was no longer the boy who had left this place a few months ago. The world inside him had changed. He walked the hallways of the university, but there was now a heaviness in the sound of his footsteps. He watched other students laughing and playing. He saw boys with their heads bowed over books in the library, and a bitter smile touched his lips. He thought, "These are all sheep. They are slaves to laws written by others. But I hold the key that can break these chains." But history bears witness that no single man can bring about a great revolution. No matter how brilliant an architect may be, he needs a builder to erect the structure. He needed a partner who would not just dream, but turn those dreams into stone-hard reality. William Russell's eyes were now searching the campus for someone who could understand his madness, someone who possessed a hunger for power as intense as his own. And then, in the crowd, he saw that face. His name was Alphonso Taft. Alphonso was not emotional like William. He was like a silent ocean, deep, serious, and calm. He was the most influential boy in the class, whom people considered a natural leader. He stood tall, and there was such an aura about him that when he entered a room, conversations would automatically cease. If William Russell was the brain of this operation, then Alphonso Taft was destined to become its arm. Their meeting did not take place in a crowded coffee shop or the common hall of a library. It was a secret meeting. In the silence of the night, while the rest of the world slept, these 2 distinct personalities sat opposite each other. On one side, there was the fire of revenge in William's eyes, and on the other, the coldness of power on Alphonso's face. That night, no ordinary college friendship was formed between them. Rather, a deal was struck, a silent pact that turned the tide of American politics for centuries to come. They shook hands, and with that handshake, the first dagger was plunged into the back of democracy. But the work was not yet finished. 2 people can conspire, but they cannot rule the world. They needed an army. They needed soldiers. But they decided they would not gather a crowd. They did not want thousands of followers. They wanted only the chosen. They made a list. Out of thousands of students at Yale, they carefully chose only 13 other names. Total, 15 people. Who were these 13 people? Were they the most virtuous, the most noble, and the most obedient boys in the class? No, absolutely not. They were those who were unhappy with the university system. They were those who had been ignored by the other major societies. They were the rebels who held hatred in their hearts against the system and who wanted to build their own separate world. They were the raw material that William Russell could mold into his own caste. Then came a dark night. Russell and Taft summoned these 13 boys to a secret location. Perhaps it was a rented room, or perhaps the roof of a building. There were no electric bulbs, only the flickering light of candles. Long, terrifying shadows of these 15 youths danced upon the walls. Silence prevailed. Then William Russell raised his voice. He placed that German formula before them. He looked into their eyes and said, "The outside world considers you merely students. You are told that you are ordinary humans. But in this room, and only in this room, you can become gods. We will give you power that the outside world cannot even imagine, but it has a price, and that price is silence." These were not words, This was magic. That night, in the dim light of the candle, these 15 boys burned their old identities to ashes right there. They held each other's hands and stood in a circle. They swore that from this day forward, they had no family, no religion, no country. From this day forward, they belonged only to each other. Now that these 15 rebel souls had gathered under one shadow, they needed an identity, a name that could separate them from the rest of the world, a flag under which they could fight their war. Initially, the name William Russell proposed was inspired by the German society he had come from. He named it the Club of Eulogia. Eulogia was the Greek goddess who was the symbol of eloquence and knowledge. On the surface, it was a very dignified name. It seemed appropriate for educated university boys to associate themselves with a goddess of knowledge. For a few days, they walked with this name. But, as the nights passed and their ambitions hardened, they began to realize that this name was weak. This name did not reflect their anger or their hunger. Russell and Taft both understood deeply that goddesses command respect, but they do not create fear. And their goal was not merely to earn respect. Their goal was to instill terror in the hearts of their enemies. They needed a symbol that, upon sight, would give the viewer a message. We are not ordinary students. We are not those you can argue with. We are predators. Just then, a strange and dark event occurred. Whispers spread across the Yale campus that these rebel boys had broken into the headquarters of the other major society, Phi Beta Kappa. It is said that in the darkness of the night, they stole some important files and symbolic items from there. Why this theft? This was not just mischief. It was a declaration of war. It was to tell the university, your locks, your secrets, and your honor are not safe with us, but our secrets you will never know. This was the moment their mindset changed forever. They thought, if we are breaking the law, if we are stealing the secrets of others, if we are rebels, then the soft name of goddesses does not suit us. We should adopt the symbol that belonged to the greatest, most dangerous, and most ruthless rebels in history. Pirates. Just think. What is the flag of pirates? A black cloth, a symbol of darkness, and on it, a white human skull and 2 broken bones, which the whole world knows as the Jolly Roger. Why did they choose this symbol? Because the philosophy of pirates was exactly what was breeding in the hearts of these 15 boys. Pirates do not obey the laws of any country. They only obey the captain of their ship. Pirates loot treasure from the world and hide it on their secret island. And most importantly, in the brotherhood of pirates, whoever betrays receives only the punishment of death. These 15 boys, dressed in expensive silk suits, speaking perfect English, had in reality become modern pirates. They decided that they too would loot the world's wealth, power, and influence and gather it in their tomb. So that night, they buried the soft name of Eulogia forever, and from its ashes, a new name emerged, a name that sends a chill through the bones just by hearing it, Skull and Bones. And to complete their identity, they painted that famous number on the wall that Russell had brought from Germany. 3, 2, 2. Now they had the people, the 15. They had a leader, Russell, and they had a terrifying symbol, the skull. But they still had no place to stay. They still met secretly in university halls and cramped rented rooms. They needed a place where they could bury their secrets. They had to build their fortress. But for that, they would have to fight a long war. Picking a symbol is easy, making a flag is easy, but keeping that flag standing in a storm is very difficult. In the 1830s, the campus of Yale University was not as peaceful as it is today. It was a silent but intense battlefield. When William Russell and his 14 companions raised the black flag and announced their presence, the university did not welcome them with flowers. They were met with hatred, contempt, and deep mockery. Imagine the Yale campus of that era. It was winter, gas lanterns burned in the fog, and whispers were everywhere. Larger and older societies already existed at Yale. They considered themselves the kings of the university. When they saw that a few rebel boys had formed a new group and made death their symbol, they felt it was an insult to their kingdom. They thought these were spoiled rich boys pretending to be pirates. And then, psychological warfare began. Posters against Skull and Bones began to appear on the campus walls overnight. Ridiculous cartoons were drawn outside their secret hideouts. When these 15 boys went to classes, other students would block their path, point fingers at their 322 symbol, and laugh. Many times, it came to physical altercations. The doors of their rented rooms were broken. Their meetings were disrupted. These 15 boys were made outcasts on campus. They were isolated in dining halls. When they sat down to eat, the chairs around them would empty. No one liked to sit with them, even in a crowd. They were alone. Under normal circumstances, any group would have shattered under this pressure. Any human would have given up out of fear of loneliness. But William Russell was not an ordinary student. He played a very deep and very dangerous psychological trick here. He turned this hatred not into his weakness, but into his strength. When, on a cold and dark night, those 15 tired and defeated boys gathered in their secret hideout, there was despair on their faces. They were close to breaking. Then William Russell stood up. He looked into their eyes and spoke a sentence that changed their thinking forever. He said, "Look at why they hate us. Is it because we are bad? No, they hate us because they fear us. A lion always faces the barking of dogs. They know we are better than them. They know we have something they do not. Those outsiders. They are not humans. They are barbarians." This was the moment the foundational vocabulary and philosophy of the Order was invented. They divided the world into two parts in their minds. The Bonesmen, us, civilized, chosen, God's special people, and rulers. The barbarians, them, ignorant, savage, slaves, and sheep. This thought became a shield. Now, when someone laughed at them, they did not feel bad. Instead, they pitied the one laughing, thinking, "What does this ignorant fool know of who we are?" The more the university scorned them, the closer they became to one another. This was the siege mentality. When arrows are raining from the outside, the people inside the fortress become ready to give their lives for one another. The bond of these 15 boys had now moved beyond friendship. They had become one body and one soul. This hatred did not let the fire of revenge inside them extinguish. Rather, it fueled it further. They swore that one day, these very students who were mocking them today would beg for jobs in front of them tomorrow. And history bears witness that they fulfilled this promise. But at that moment, they faced a major practical problem. They were still hiding in rented rooms. The walls were thin, and the ears of the barbarians were pressed against the outside. Their secrets were not safe. If they were to survive these barbarians and preserve their power forever, they needed a place that no one could break. They did not need a home. They needed a fortress from which they could look out, but into which no one from the outside could look in. But a rebel group cannot survive on emotional speeches, stolen symbols, and oaths taken in dark rooms alone. History tells us that for any empire to stand and to rule for centuries, it needs land. Castles cannot be built in the air. For the first 24 years, William Russell's group lived like nomads. From 1832 to 1856, They kept meeting secretly in various halls of the Yale campus. Sometimes they gathered in the basement of a science laboratory, where the smell of chemicals hung in the air. Sometimes they met in the cramped and dark rented room of a student. But this was not safe. The walls were very thin, and the ears of the barbarians were listening outside. In every meeting, while taking every oath, a fear sat in their hearts that someone might hear. The fear of their secrets being exposed hung over their heads like a naked sword at all times. By 1856, they had understood that if they were to rule for the next 100 years, they had to leave these rented houses. They needed a place that was not just a clubhouse, but a bunker. A place the outside world could neither see, nor hear, nor break. In that same year, they took a massive and historic step. They quietly gave their group a legal form and went to the state to register a corporation. They named it the Russell Trust Association. This was the moment when these boys turned from students into businessmen. Now they were not merely a group, they were an institution. Now they could buy land, they could invest money, and they could rely on the law. And then, they bought an expensive piece of land right in the middle of Yale University, on the busiest street, High Street. The university administration and other students were amazed. They wondered what these boys were going to do here. Will they build a library, a beautiful hostel, or perhaps a church? But when construction began and the dust started to rise, the entire campus became terrified. The building rising there was completely different from Yale's beautiful Gothic style. It did not look like a home. It was being built from heavy, rough, and ominous brown sandstone, reminiscent of the ancient tombs of Egypt. But the most terrifying and strange thing was that as the walls grew higher, people noticed something. The architects had left no space for windows in the walls. Just reflect on this philosophy. What is the purpose of a university? Light. That is why windows in libraries and classrooms are kept large so that sunlight, the symbol of knowledge, can enter. But these 15 boys reversed this concept. They erected a structure that was the enemy of light. Through brick and stone, they told the world, "We do not need your light. We have our own torches. We do not need outside knowledge. We have our own secrets. The outside world has no business inside, and the inside world has no connection to the outside." When this building was completed, it silenced everyone. Its iron doors were heavy and black, showing the marks of rust and time. Ivy was deliberately grown on its walls to make it look even older and more frightening. This building looked like a massive, silent coffin placed on the ground by giant hands. That is why it was not called a hall or house. Its name automatically came to people's tongues, a name that was the reality of its existence: the tomb. What was inside this building? Its blueprints were never made public, but rumors from the construction workers leaked out. It is said that the majority of this building is not above ground, but below ground. There are deep cellars there where the sun's rays have never reached. There are tunnels that perhaps lead to other buildings of the university. There are rooms whose walls are soundproof, so that screams or laughter from inside cannot go out. The construction of this building changed Skull and Bones forever. Now they were not just a society, now they had become a power. This building sat like a permanent stain on the chest of Yale University. Students came and went, classes changed, professors retired. But the tomb stood right there, silent, unmoving, and invincible. This was now their fortress, and sitting inside this fortress, they began making their first formal plan to conquer the world. Now they had a place to hide. Now the question was, what conspiracy were they preparing in this darkness? We saw the fortress. We felt the terror of their stony walls and windowless rooms. But history has a bitter rule. For any empire, no matter how powerful, to survive, It needs more than just blood, emotions, and oaths. To keep it alive, it requires fuel. And in this world, that fuel is only one thing: money. A common student, no matter how rich, does not have enough money to build a palace in the middle of a university and run it for centuries. William Russell, who was the son of a businessman, knew this very well. He knew that if this society was to be kept alive forever, it could not be left to students' pocket money. It needed a system, a river that would never run dry. So in 1856, in the very same year that the last brick of the tomb was being laid, they quietly laid the foundation of another building. But this building was not made of stones, but of paper. They went to the state legislature and registered a private company. They named it the Russell Trust Association. This name appears very boring, simple, and insignificant on the surface. It sounds like the name of an insurance company or a charity organization. But this is very simple. Was their greatest trick. This was the moment when Skull and Bones transformed from a university brotherhood into a multi-million-dollar corporation. This was a massive turning point in history, because usually university clubs have no legal existence. They exist in the air. But the Russell Trust was a registered business, which had its own assets, its own bank account, and its own lawyers. What was the function of this trust? Its job was to manage the treasury of the order. But the question is, where did the treasure come from? Here, the feedback loop works. Understand this cycle. When a Bonesman leaves the university and goes out into the world and becomes a tycoon of Wall Street or the owner of a massive company, he never forgets the order. In his will or during his life, he quietly signs over a large portion of his earned wealth to the Russell Trust. This is not charity. This is an investment from his side. What happens with this money? This money ensures that the electricity and repair bills of the tomb are always paid on time, whether there is a student inside or not. This money is used to pay the fees of the most expensive lawyers who protect their secrets. It is even said that the Russell Trust did not just buy the tomb, but they have purchased an entire island near New York, Deer Island. A private island where these old and new members go, far from the eyes of the world, to celebrate their summer holidays and hold secret meetings. This is the flow of wealth that never stops. But the greatest benefit of the Russell Trust is not money, but protection. Imagine if tomorrow a new and strict principal of Yale University comes and decides, "I do not like this secret society. I will close it down." So what will he do? He can expel the students. He can close the classes. But he cannot put a lock on the door of the tomb. Why? Because that building and that land are not the property of the university. They are the private property of the Russell Trust Association. The law of the university does not apply there. The police cannot enter there without a warrant. This is a legal shield. William Russell had thought in 1856 about what would happen 100 years later. He built a structure that was legally more powerful than the university itself. Today, the Russell Trust Association possesses assets worth millions, and perhaps billions, of dollars. This is a treasury that never runs empty, and an organization that has this much money, this much land, and such powerful friends. No minor power in the world can shake it. Now they had the people, the 15. They had the fortress, the tomb. And they had the never-ending wealth, Russell Trust. The machine was complete. Now they were ready for their first great war. And coincidentally, America was also moving toward a massive and bloody war. The Civil War, according to plan. But destiny holds a test for every new king. And for Skull and Bones, that test came very soon, and in a terrifying form. In 1856, their trust was formed, and only 5 years later, in 1861, a terrifying crack appeared in the chest of America: the Civil War. Just imagine the atmosphere of that time. This was no ordinary war fought on borders. This was the war in which a brother was holding a knife to the throat of his own brother. The entire country had split into two parts. North and South had become thirsty for each other's blood. Cities were burning, fields were turning to ash, and everywhere there was only the smell of gunpowder. And Yale University was stuck right in the middle of this storm. This was the greatest phase of life and death for the order. Why? Because the members of Skull and Bones were not just from the North. There was a deep division within their brotherhood. Many of them were the sons of wealthy plantation owners from the southern states, who had now become rebels fighting for their own separate country. On the other side, many were the sons of northern industrialists and bankers who were loyal to the Union and Abraham Lincoln. Suddenly, a massive question mark arose. Those 15 people who had sworn an oath in the same closed room before the same skull that they would remain loyal to each other forever. Now, they had become enemies on the battlefield. On one hand was the oath of the order, and on the other hand was the gun of their respective country. The question was, which loyalty would win? Would they shoot their brother for the sake of their country, or would they betray their country to save their brother? History tells us that as soon as the war began, the campus of Yale University started to empty. Boys left their degrees incomplete and went to wear uniforms. Classrooms became deserted. But inside the order, there was a strange and mysterious silence. When people in the outside world were calling each other traitors, a different game was being played inside this tomb. Rumors say that even during the war, their secret contacts were never severed. Letters continued to cross the borders. Some historical references suggest that on the battlefield, where rain of bullets was falling, even there, if a Bonesman discovered that the enemy officer facing him was his brother, silent concessions were given. They fought the war, but they did not let the order break. They proved that their loyalty was not with any flag, any constitution, or any country, but only with this symbol of 322. But the most important and darkest part of this war was not happening on the field, but behind the field. When the whole country was burning, the economy was being destroyed, and thousands of young men were dying. What were the older members of the Russell Trust doing? They were investing. War is the best time for business. The more blood flows, the more money is made. In that era, those who sold weapons to the army, who provided uniforms to soldiers, who laid new railway lines in broken cities, became rich overnight. And coincidentally, those who took these contracts were often the very people who belonged to this network of Yale. They were not fighting the war, they were running the war. When the war ended in 1865 and the smoke cleared, America had changed. Old America, the America of farmers, slaves, and landlords, was dead. And from the ashes, a new America was rising, the America of factories, banks, steel mills, and massive corporations. And in whose hands were the reins of this new America? In the hands of those same people who remained safe during the war and who earned profit from this destruction. The Civil War did not weaken Skull and Bones, it made it a superpower. They had learned the greatest lesson of history. Governments can fall, countries can break, maps can change, but if your network is strong and you have money, you can survive every storm. After 1865, people returned to the university. They saw that the tomb stood right there. Not a scratch had come upon its walls. This building had won the war. But now, the people emerging from inside were not just students. They were America's new kingmakers. Now they had money, power, and unity. The fire of the Civil War had cooled, America was rebuilding from the ashes. But the wheel of time kept turning at its own pace. Those 15 rebel boys, who had dreamed of changing the world in that cold night of 1832, were no longer boys. Silver had come to their hair. Their faces were filled with wrinkles. William Russell and Alphonso Taft were now in the final evening of their lives. But before dying, they wanted to see with their own eyes the fruit of the tree whose seed they had sown in their youth. And that fruit was no ordinary fruit. It was the poisonous fruit of power. One of these founders, Alphonso Taft, had now become a massive name in America. He was no longer just a lawyer. He had used his silent power to firmly plant his roots in Washington, D.C. He became the Attorney General of America, and then the Secretary of War. This was the first major victory for the order. They were now making decisions about wars. But Alphonso Taft was a man of great foresight. He knew that true success was not what I became. True success is what my son becomes. If this power lasts only for one generation, it will be wasted. It was necessary to make it a dynasty. This is where the most dangerous and powerful aspect of Skull and Bones begins. The dynasty, the transfer of power from father to son. When Alphonso's son, William Howard Taft, arrived at Yale University, he did not need to pass any exam. For him, the door to the tomb was already open. He did not need any talent. His blood was his merit. He was a heavy-set, jovial, and highly intelligent young man. On the surface, he seemed like a decent human being. But the most important thing was that he was a Bonesman. And then, the world saw for the first time how the machinery of the order works. This was no democracy. This was a project. The entire power of the state, the money of all Bonesmen bankers, and the influence of the media stood behind William Howard Taft. He was pushed up every rung of the ladder. Wherever he stumbled, he was caught. And finally, in 1909, that moment arrived, which William Russell had dreamed of 77 years ago. William Howard Taft took the oath as the 27th President of America. Just feel the gravity and depth of this moment. That boy who had knelt before a human skull in a windowless room and sworn that his first and last loyalty was to the order, was now the commander-in-chief of the world's most powerful army. Now, in his hand was the Constitution of America, and in his pocket was the secret symbol of the order. The White House had now become a branch of the tomb. But the story does not end here. Taft's success was even greater and more astonishing. Usually presidents retire and write books or live on farmhouses, but the order does not waste its pawns. After his presidency ended, William Howard Taft was not sent home. He was made the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of America. This is a singular and unique event in American history. The same man enforced the country's laws as president, executive, and later interpreted the country's laws as Chief Justice, judiciary, meaning 2 out of the 3 pillars of the state were in the hands of a single Bonesman. This was total control. This was the biggest joke in the history of democracy. When William Howard Taft sat in the chair of the White House or the Supreme Court, did he make decisions alone? Or did those old whispers echo in his ears? Historians say that during his reign, many old friends from Yale University received important positions. This was not merely friendship. This was a debt being repaid. This first major success changed the order forever. Now they did not need to hide, because the law was their own. Now they did not need to worry about money, because the treasury was their own. The founder, William Russell, though long in his grave, would have had a happy soul, because his revenge was complete. He had proven wrong to all those people at the university who had rejected him. he had proven that 15 people could rule over millions. But power is an addiction, and addiction always grows. One president was not enough. They wanted more. They wanted continuity. And now their eyes were on the next generation, in a family that was destined to become the second name of Skull and Bones in the future, a name that would become synonymous with wars, oil, and politics, the Bush family. William Howard Taft was just the beginning. The order had learned a massive lesson from history. If power is to be preserved, it must be kept in the bloodline. It is better to trust your own son than to trust a stranger. And then, in the 20th century, a family emerged that became the poster boy for Skull and Bones, a name that became the second name for wars, oil, politics, and secret agencies. The Bush family. This story is not of a single person, but of an entire generation that grew up in the shadow of the tomb. This was a monarchy that had no crown on its head, but held the control of the entire world in its hand. First comes Prescott Bush. He was the grandfather of George Bush. Prescott Bush became a member of Skull and Bones in 1917. In his university days, he was a tall and fearless young man, and according to a very old and terrifying legend, this was the very man who, along with his companions, dug up the grave of the famous Apache chief Geronimo. It is said that they stole his skull and hid it, bringing it into the tomb. This theft was no crime to them, but a trophy of their bravery. It was to prove that they could conquer both death and history. But Prescott Bush's real achievement was not stealing bones, but making money. And money with whom? Some highly controversial historical records suggest that Prescott Bush's banking relations before World War II were with Nazi Germany. While the whole world was preparing to fight Hitler, some people of the order were quietly playing on both sides. This is the place where ethics end and only profit remains. Then came his son, George H.W. Bush, the 41st President of America. At Yale University, he was the captain of the baseball team, but in the darkness of the night, he was a loyal soldier of the tomb. His code name was Magog. These are biblical names they give each other. If you look at George Bush Sr.'s career, you will understand the entire map of the order. First, he became an oil tycoon. Then, he became the ambassador to the United Nations. Then, he became America's representative to China. And then, he became the director of the CIA. And finally, president. Is it merely a coincidence that today the name of the CIA headquarters is George Bush Center for Intelligence? This name is testimony that the world of espionage and Skull and Bones are two sides of the same coin. On one side, they run the world, and on the other side, they spy on the world. And then, the third generation came, George W. Bush, the 43rd President of America. This was the man during whose tenure 9/11 happened, who launched attacks on Afghanistan and Iraq, and who changed the map of the world. In university, he was considered a carefree boy, weak in studies and fond of parties, but he did not need to work hard. Because when your grandfather and father are Bonesmen, the chair is already prepared for you. This family proved that democracy is just a facade. In reality, it is a family estate. A grandfather, Prescott, becomes a senator. A father, Bush Sr., becomes president. And a son, Bush Jr., also becomes president. And what was the common thing among the three? Not a party, not an ideology, but that Skull and Bones before which they had sworn an oath. When George Bush was asked about his membership in 2004, he wrote a sentence in his autobiography that explains everything. In my senior year, I joined Skull and Bones, a secret society, so secret, I can't say anything more. This silence is the greatest proof of their loyalty. The Bush family gave the order a power that perhaps even the founder, William Russell had not imagined. They turned this society into the control room of global wars and the global economy. Now, it was no longer just a group of students. It had become the private club of the world's most dangerous family. But every rise has a fear of a fall. And after the Bush family, people began to ask questions. Is this power still as strong? Or are there secrets being exposed in the age of the Internet? With the rise of the Bush family, Skull and Bones reached the very peak of its power. The American election of 2004 was that strange and rare moment in history which sealed the success of this order. On one side was George W. Bush, Republican Party. On the other side was John Kerry, Democratic Party. The whole world thought this was a war of two different ideologies. Debates were raging on TV channels. People were getting emotional. But in reality, both had emerged from this very room. Both were Bonesmen. This was not a contest of democracy. It was a friendly match between two old members of the same club. On that day, William Russell's dream from 1832 came 100% true. Whether the coin flips or not, whether it is heads or tails, the government will remain ours. But, as soon as this victory was achieved, the world changed. The 21st century had begun, and in this new century came a storm that was the greatest threat to the walls of the tomb. That storm was the Internet and digital media. In the past, keeping secrets was easy. But in today's age, everyone has a camera in their pocket. Everyone is a journalist. There is a flood of information that cannot be stopped. WikiLeaks, social media, and investigative blogs began to put cracks in those old walls. People started asking questions. They were sharing lists on the Internet. They were flying drone cameras outside the tomb. So the question arises, did this digital noise destroy Skull and Bones? Has their power weakened now? If you think so, you do not understand the nature of power, because a smart predator is one who sees the direction of the wind and changes his position. And the Order did exactly that. If you observe, in the last 15 years, we have seen no Bonesman president. Their faces are seen less in the White House now. Why? Did they lose? No. They simply changed their hideout. They understood that politics has now become a very noisy and risky place. The eye of the media is there at all times, and one has to answer. Therefore, they stepped back from politics and moved their power to a safer, more powerful, and more secret place. And that place is global finance. Today, the biggest and most influential members of Skull and Bones are not sitting in the White House. They are running massive private equity firms like Blackstone, like Stephen Schwarzman. They are the owners of the world's largest hedge funds. They have abandoned the power of the vote and adopted the power of the note. Because politicians change every 4 years, they have to answer to the public. But capital never retires. Capital answers to no one. Today, they do not make laws. They buy economies. So is Skull and Bones still powerful today? The answer is, more than ever before. But now their power is not visible. It has become invisible. This tomb is now just a symbol. The real order no longer resides in the building at Yale University. Now it lives in the servers of the stock market. It lives in the algorithms of artificial intelligence. It lives in those secret bank accounts that control the world. In 1832, a young William Russell brought an idea from across the sea. He sowed a seed in stony ground. Today, 200 years later, that seed has become such a forest that it has wrapped the entire world in its embrace. We feel that we are free. We feel that we make our own decisions. But perhaps we are merely flying in a cage whose bars we cannot see. Chapter 11. The Reflection, Philosophical Conclusion, and Good Night. Our long, dark, and weary journey through history reaches its end here today. We started our journey from the stormy ocean of 1832 and reached the digital web of 2024. We saw how humanity's hunger for power imprisoned it in dark caves and windowless tombs. We saw how a few people silently took the world into their grasp. It is natural to feel fear upon knowing this. But at the end of this terrifying story, a very simple and bright truth is also hidden. We often fear these secret powers. We feel they are giants and we are dwarfs. But remember, a secret is only powerful as long as it remains a secret. When light falls, shadows vanish. And tonight, together, we have cast light upon this secret. The greatest lesson is not that the world is full of conspiracies. The greatest lesson is that humans must protect their own freedom. Those people may own the treasures of the world, they may be running governments. But if you look closely, they are prisoners of their own created fear. They are besieged in their own fortresses. A true king is not one who rules over others. A true king is one who can sleep peacefully at night, who needs no secret basement, no false oath, or no skull for his protection. True power is not in control. True power is in freedom. If this journey has given you a new perspective, if this story has opened a closed window in your mind, then become a part of this caravan of truth beyond the veil. Press the subscribe button and join us. Our archive is deep, and many unheard stories still await you. Share this journey with those friends who are in search of the truth. Thank you for working with us. Keep your mind calm. Keep your thoughts free. Because the real light is not that which is inside a tomb. The real light is that which is burning in your own heart. Good night.